It is the morning after Michigan, your national title winner. I'm here with Todd McShay, big win over Washington. Let me just start with this, Todd. I'm glad the final score was 34-13, even though we had a 17-10 half. We had a 20-13 score at some point. You were kind of wondering, like, hey, can Washington actually make this? It was game, but you were wondering, like, could we have a tie score at some point? But ultimately, Michigan was the superior football team, superior defensive and offensive lines. And, my main concern was, you think about Aller, McCord, Milroe in the three biggest games, Iowa's version of offense in the Big Ten championship game. I'm like, Penix in this wide receiver group is a massive step up. I think my favorite thing from last night, there's a bunch of different elements and ways you can look at this game, but there was a stat after the first half where they said in Kalen DeBoer's tenure at Washington, it's the first time they've ever gone a half without a 20-yard completion. The coverage and eliminating that part of the game, the deep shot from Penix to these guys, knowing that it wasn't there, Washington adjusting and having to throw underneath. For me, that's the most impressive thing I saw. What we know was a great statistical Michigan defense, and then to see him go up against this and take away this thing that was just so much fun to watch all season long. That's how they won the game. I mean, look, there's other factors as well, but that's the thing throughout it. I'm like, man, it's just not there for Penix. They found a way to eliminate these guys.
Yeah, it was impressive. And I agree. I watched a game that was a 2 or 3 touchdown difference for the most part. And Michigan pulling away felt like the appropriate, finish to that game. I mean, there were so many things that stood out. I think defensively, what you were touching on, how well coached, and we've talked about this before, how well coached is Michigan defensively, both sides of the ball, but defensively especially. And to come out and we really focus on defensive coordinator and the scheme and what Harbaugh's done and new coaches and kind of what his progression was over the years at Michigan. But specifically in that game, to take away the deep ball, it was like watching a pro defense is really what it was. Like watching Belichick's defense, from week to week changing according to what the opponent does best and taking away what the opponent does best. If you're going to beat Washington, you've got to take away the deep pass. And how do you do that? You do that with a lot of zone coverage, mixing coverages, 2 high safeties. Mikey Sanistrel, had that missed tackle in the semifinal game. But other than that, you go back and watch the tape the last 2 games. How impactful is he? Not only the big interception at the end of the game, but in coverage, making open field tackles. Like that one-on-one tackle that he had was critical. I think it was on a 3rd down, turned the ball over. So playing a disciplined style of defense, they're good at corner. They're really good and disciplined and have veteran guys at the safety position. Sandler's still playing that nickel, kind of on the inside. And then the thing that I pointed out, I texted you last night while we were watching the game. We say this a lot. Like I remember talking about the Bills earlier in the season. We're talking about the 49ers, the Eagles. If you're going to be able to play that too high safety shell and back off in coverage and take away the deep ball, you've got to be dominant up front. And not only was Michigan dominant with their front 4, the depth stood out to me. Like every time I'm watching the ball snap, it's a different combination of numbers along that defensive front. You've got Mason Graham, Chris Jenkins, Kenneth Grant at defensive tackle. At the edge spots, you've got Jalen Harrell, Josiah Stewart, Derek Moore, Braylon McGregor. These guys are rotating in and out throughout the game. And the sack production wasn't great last night, but look at Michael Penix at the end of the game, limping with the left ankle sprain, grabbing onto it. It looked like a cracked rib right in the 4th quarter. And it wasn't, what did they finish with? 1 sack, I think it was. I mean, if you watch him physically, how disrupted he was, you would have thought, well, he was sacked 6-7 times in that game, right? I mean, Michigan had the 5 sacks in the first half against Jalen Milroe against Alabama in the semifinal. It wasn't the sack production. It was the constant pressure. And it was from the interior, and then it was from coming on the edges, and it was throwing him off his mark. If you really study his throws, and I went back early this morning and watched it, that's why I'm 5 minutes late coming on the podcast for you. I apologize. I was studying the throws early this morning. There were very few, Rye, where he was sitting there and could step up in the pocket, follow through, transitioning his weight from back to front, and actually, drive the football the way he's used to driving the football. And we'll get into the NFL draft stuff, But when people see Penix in the semifinal game and say, well, why isn't he a first rounder? A good part of it might be the durability issues, which we saw crept into play last night. But also, if you take away his ability to hang in the pocket and throw on time and have protection around him, he can become, I don't want to say ordinary by any stretch, but he can become a lot less easy to deal with. And that front, they came in with the combination of those 7 guys I just listed off, right? The defensive tackles and edge guys, 32.5 sacks coming into the game combined, and they all had production, none of them being like a 10, 12 sack guy. They consistently disrupted, and that made the lives of the secondary easier, and it allowed Michigan to play that softer coverage over the top and take away the deep ball that Penix and McMillan and Odunze and all those great receivers have lived off of. They've thrived off that all year long.
Yeah, Grant had the only sack, but sacks can be a big lie. Years
totally.
From now,
That's Nick Saban's biggest thing.
Right.
He always yells at me about that because I talked to all the edge rushers he's had over the years. He's like sacks are the most overrated stat in football. He's like pressure. That's all that matters, and we saw that in this game last night.
First quarter, Michigan runs for 170 yards on 9 carries. And, the Edwards one when they're behind the sticks and you're like, man, he got stuffed and then bounced out and no one is there and he's not touched. Corum has the big run. I'm sure if you're Washington, whenever you get to the point of being able to watch the film, you're like, is it our guys came out too hyped? Because there was literally no gap contained at all in that first quarter where you're like, where are you guys? Like you're all getting bottled up. And then it's these free runs. And clearly they figured out something, in the meat of this game, in the middle part of it. But at that point, it was so horrifying. They're going like, what's going to happen here? And look, the O-line had some plays too. There was one play, I think it was like the first play after, let me see here. It might've been after the pick to start the second half. There was 2 O-linemen, like there were 2 interior linemen with 10 yards down the field, just chucking guys out of the way. But I think that first quarter, as dominant as it was for Michigan, has to be the thing the staff for Washington looks back and is just incredibly frustrated, being like the first 15 minutes, our defensive, like nobody was in their assignments. And it was just, at that point, it's like, you've given up this many points. Like this is going to get ugly.
I almost thought watching it that Washington was playing, and I, again, went back and studied the coach copy tape. They were almost too worried about discipline and not just playing, just like playing loose and fast. If you look at the adjustments, they brought up another safety more consistently, especially on first downs and second downs in the second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter. And the adjustments were made. I mean, you look at, they averaged 19 yards per carry, obviously kind of a twisted stat because of the 3 long runs in the first quarter. And then the rest of the game, it was right just over 4 yards per carry. So Washington made the adjustment. Unfortunately, it was so bad in the first quarter that it was too little too late for 3 quarters, which is rare to say. But watching Washington early on, they were so obsessed with being gap sound that ironically it prevented, like the linebackers weren't firing gaps. They weren't playing aggressive. They were so worried that, all right, we're playing Michigan. They're going to line up in jumbo packages. They're going to bring in a third tackle at times. They're going to have 2 or 3 tight ends in. We've got to make sure we have our gap assignments. And everyone was trying to do their job, but no one was doing it aggressively enough. Then they brought in more, additional help, more 7, 8 man boxes, and in the second, third,
and they were
quarters.
showing it too. Like they were getting out of it a lot, but it was clear that they were like, let's just at least like show that we have numbers here.
Yes, exactly. And to me, like you saw in the second quarter, linebackers finally being like, all right, I'm going to take a chance and shoot a gap and see if we can disrupt more. There was more like kind of laying back, holding on to blocks and hoping. And I think Blake Corum, if you really watched it early on, Blake Corum is so patient, right? And he's a powerful runner and he's got great vision. And so he came in early in the game and he was picking up 5-6 yards at a time. But they were in their gaps and they weren't giving up the big plays. And then Edwards comes in and in the one of the 2 long runs, when you talked about it, when he ran into the offensive line, then cut back, he didn't have the patience that Corum had. but his speed, I think it shocked Washington. It's like, all right, we're so used to Corum and what we've watched on tape. And it's like, if we're in the right position, we might give up 4 or 5 or 6 yards, but we're not going to give up a big play. Let's be where we need to be. And then all of a sudden, Edwards comes in, those 2 long runs. It was like, holy shit. Like, he's doing something that Corum doesn't do. And Edwards hasn't been Edwards for, the vast majority of the season. He was the biggest difference in the game to me, at least in the first half, because that change of pace, that speed that Edwards had threw Washington completely off guard. Their pursuit angles were killed. They couldn't track him and they couldn't get back in position. So that game plan from Sherrod Moore, from Jim Harbaugh to come out and pound it. And you got to believe too, all week long, you look for motivation. Michigan won the Joe Moore Award, the best offensive line in college football the past 2 years. And now all of a sudden it gets ripped from them. And that's what they've built this program on. Early on it was Jim Harbaugh and Shea Patterson, and we're going to do more spread and all that. And when he got back to his roots of what we did at Stanford, what I did at San Francisco, like who I am, and they brought in different coaches and they focused more on the power run game, that's when they started to ascend outside of that COVID year in 2020. But Michigan, the identity of this team is its offensive line. And to know that they're going up against Washington and the defensive line trying to prove that we've got the best offensive line and Michigan's offensive line coming in with an edge, you could see early on, we're going to make a point of this, that we are the best offensive line in the country and we are going to line up. We're going to get hat on hat. It's going to be old school football. It may not be sexy. It may not be a lot of fun for television, but we're going to do it our way. And that's what they did. And they sent a big message in that first quarter.
Yeah, if you look at Harbaugh, his entire run, like when everybody is falling in love with the spread, it's like, yeah, but have you played Stanford yet? And that's what I appreciated so much about Stanford at the time. There was a time, I think, with Wisconsin as well, where it's like, I kind of like, the reason I love college football so much is that there were still times where you felt like teams had real identities, styles. That's how they recruited. And because they recruited that way, that's how they had to play. Now, when you didn't score, boosters get mad because it's like, I'd rather lose 42-35 than not be able to score 20 points every single week.
Right.
But it worked at Stanford. And to see with Michigan, you're like, well, Michigan's had its own deal. Like I always felt like when Oregon showed up to Ann Arbor, I think in 2007, and looked like a track team running around, they were like, all right, we need to catch up with everybody else. And then you bring in Rich Rodriguez because he was kind of the guy, he was one of the early architects of a lot of this stuff.
Yeah,
however, he inherited the influence of offensive styles. So the reason I'm bringing it up is like to see it all come full circle, to see Jim flirt with different things and then to come back. And I don't know if this proves, hey, there could be this shift. Sometimes something will happen. It's like, just get back to old school football and have awesome D lines and have awesome offensive lines. Maybe this was just their year and the way that it was going to work out. They're going to beat everybody anyway. So I don't think there's going to be some shift now philosophically for college football teams to want to look like this all the time because it's, it's probably hard to recruit.
There are only so many of these dudes is the problem.
Right. But that's what I love about the Harbaugh story. He's an interesting cat. We've both had times with him. You probably more so than I have. After the game, you never really know. You're like, what? What is he? But whatever it is, it works. And now this is the 4th time it's worked. And that's like, it's not a long resume of like, no matter where you go with this guy. And granted, in Michigan, it took longer than everybody expected, but it actually happened. And there's a long list of people where this doesn't even come close to happening, even when you think you have the right guy. So I don't know if there's more that you can tell us about his philosophy and conversations with him, the team building part of this. We've touched on how this is like the year 3, a culmination of everything they've been through. He called this core stalwarts. You look at the career starts, there's like 600 starts with these guys. I don't know if there's more that I haven't pointed out that you want to share about him and how Michigan got here.
He's such a quirky dude, right? That he turns off a lot of people nationally and in the media. Like even just watching him in the interviews that he's had this past week, he's very clearly trying to avoid any questions about what the future is and not take any of the the spotlight away from his players and what this season has been. He's always testing the boundaries. Of all the coaches I've been around, I don't think a coach has asked me more questions. And it's not because of me. He's also asking in production meeting Brian Greasy questions. He's asking, he's always trying to figure out another angle. And I even go back and laugh about like the stories I've heard him tell about Halloween and how it's a competition in his house, and like it's not about the costumes and going out to parties. Like the Harbaugh family, like literally, like it's a competition to see who can get the most candy on Halloween. And that, like, it doesn't surprise me, some of the things that's happened this year, and that he's kind of in that gray area when it comes to recruiting and the sign stealing and all that. And I don't know, I'm not even getting into that. I'm just saying, being around him, and I've spent more time, I don't want to say more, but like I've spent a lot of, we had so many Michigan games. I was part of I actually got in trouble at ESPN. I was part of the that big recruiting thing. He called me in to help and spend a weekend, in Ann Arbor and not help recruit, but to be there. And they were putting on a big show. And my grandfather worked at Michigan, and I thought it was okay to go. And then ESPN called and was like, don't we pay you a paycheck? And I was like, I didn't get money, and they were still mad at me. And I've been around Jim a good amount, and he's just so inquisitive, and his brain works different than most guys. And I mean that in a positive way when it comes to coaching, that he doesn't leave anything unturned. He's never satisfied with, okay, we've got the answers. And so it's always, what can we do a little bit better? How can we compete? And I think players, I mean, you listen to players, like they adore this guy because they know that he's doing every single day, he's fighting for just like some competitive edge that can make them better. And to have guys like Blake Corum come back when they didn't need to come back and could have gone onto the NFL. A lot of players go back to Michigan because they love the environment. They love what's going on there. They love the way they're treated. They love the way they're pushed properly. They love the privacy of every practice. They love how it is. Everything's insulated there. And I think the little things that he has done over the course of the last 5 years, the coaching changes were the biggest thing. Bringing in younger coaches, more innovative coaches, guys that kind of were ahead of the curve instead of reacting to the curve, and then trusting those guys. When you're Jim Harbaugh, those types of coaches can be power freaks and take control of everything. That's not his deal, man. Like if he trusts you and you earn his trust, he's going to let you run your stuff. And I think that's what a lot of great coaches in college football and the NFL do. But you've got to earn that trust. And he finally got a staff where he could take a step back. And he was forced to take a step back twice this year, right? But he can take a step back even when he's the head guy on the field and doing everything and say, you run your deal. I'm here to support it. I'm here to help you. I'm going to make decisions on fourth downs. I'm going to tell you the things that a head coach needs to tell you, but you run your deal. And he's allowed the young coaches to run their side of the ball. And I would argue there isn't a team in college football with better coordinators and assistant coaches than Michigan. And it showed this year.